for a second because Rich Madrid had a stat that Grant kind of went with on one of his videos that I saw from earlier today. It sounds like Grant may be in Palm Springs. He said the Niners are averaging 9.8 yards when they run a zone read run with Trey under center. They average 9.8 yards per carry. A lot of people would instantly say, yeah, well, what about the Debo run against Seattle? Doesn't that kind of distort the whole thing? Of course it does, but it takes it down to 7.7 yards per carry, which is still outstanding. The question I would have for you is this. We don't know about we've seen a small sample size of Brock. We've seen a tiny sample size of the 49ers with Trey. Not only that, it was so early and it's hard to even evaluate if Shanahan, like again, let's say that Arizona game, was that the way Shanahan's going to call the games with Trey, or is that just the way he called it that day? You know what I mean? I personally, I think there's probably going to be some evolution there, and that was probably more about where Trey was in Kyle's mind at that point. So we ran kind of a run-heavy scheme, a lot of quarterback runs. I wasn't a fan of it. I expressed it. But let me ask you this. Do you think the 49ers averaged 35 or 33 a game with Brock Purdy in those starts? I won't even go into what they average under Trey because they haven't played enough under Trey. But you can see the differences in the two quarterbacks. Purdy's more accurate and doesn't have nearly the arm strength. He seems to really have great quickness within the pocket, but he doesn't have the explosive movement that Trey has. Trey has a big arm, a lot of speed to it, but I don't know about his downfield accuracy. We got a glimpse of Trey throwing downfield in the Green Bay preseason game to Danny Gray, hit him in stride for 6. Seems like the kind of play we may be able to see more of. We didn't really see Danny Gray flourish beyond that this year. But what do you think, Vish, as far as the Niners offense with Trey Lance, the Niners offense with Brock Purdy, projecting into the future? Is it the same offense? Can they run the same offense? Does it have to be two dramatically different offenses in your mind? And is there one that you view as superior to the other? Is the Niner offense with Brock superior to what it potentially can be with Trey Lance at quarterback? Or is Trey's arm strength and physical gifts supersede what Brock brings to the table? And you think long-term the Niner offense could be more prolific and more explosive with Trey? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a very deep question. I will say that I don't think we've been able to even see the full scope of what the offense would be with Trey Lance. I think we have an idea of that, but it's really hard to tell. Now, there are a few particular things that he has done well consistently. For example, you talked about the throw to Danny Great, right? Like that slot fade. In the little we've been able to see him between preseason and regular season, that's one throw he's made well, right? He threw one week 1 against Chicago to Juwan Jennings, slot fade. He threw one versus the Chargers in preseason to Trent Sherfield in the 2-minute drill. That was a slot fade. Danny Gray, all the same concept, an inverted smash concept. They got a hitch and a slot fade to that side of the field, usually out of empty, and he throws the slot fade really, really well. Outside of that, it's tough to really tell. You know, he's had some ugly misses. For example, I was going back and watching his second half against Seattle when he came in recently. I forgot that his first throw was a little naked. They gave him an easy throw to the flat to George Kittle, and he two-hopped it to him. It was one of the worst misses I can actually remember from a quarterback. And I was going back to watch for the good things of Trey Lance, and that was an ugly miss. So, like, he's had a few misses in there that have been particularly bad, but he's also made a few particularly amazing throws. Like, he had a little hitch that he threw to Brandon Ayuk on 3rd and 2 in the Cardinals game. Absolute rip, no window. He puts it low and away, back shoulder. It was a great throw. The throw to Ray McLeod, week 1, you know, layering that ball over, you know, the cover 2 defender, flat defender. Incredible throw, right? So there's been a few really great throws in there too. I think in theory, if Trey Lance hits the ceiling, or the intention is in theory, if Trey Lance is the player that the 49ers thought he could become when they drafted him, you do all the stuff you do in the pass game with Brock Purdy and Jimmy Garoppolo, and then you have this added element of 11 on 11 in the run game, because everything in the run game is based on the zone read principle, right? all your run plays, you have an RPO package built out of it. There's something you can definitely do that way with him. Now, it's tough to see that in theory because clearly they didn't trust him to do everything that the other two guys did in the past game, because in a lot of past situations like 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 with the other two guys, they elected to run him. They would run a quarterback draw, they would run a zone read play. So it's a little bit different from that standpoint. But in theory, Larry, I do think that the offense is most prolific with Trey Lance because his legs and his ability to be a part of the run game is an added weapon. And I do think that's part of why they drafted him. For what it's worth, Larry, like I think Shanahan did want to have this 11 on 11 element to his run game. We've seen that, the outside zone and the stretch zone, which he's known for, the NFL has kind of got answers to stop it right now with the wider fronts, the penny fronts, the 5-2 fronts. They've got a good grasp on stopping outside zone. In fact, I would say just off the top of my head, I don't know the actual breakdown, but just off the top of my head, and I've probably watched every snap of the 49ers multiple times this season, it was probably 50-50 on gap versus zone distribution in the run game, which, I mean, it's been increasing splits for Shanahan, but, for a team that's quote unquote wide zone based, I mean, look at the second half against Dallas. All gap scheme, duo, stuff like that. Not necessarily your conventional outside zone run scheme. And so when you have, the NFL catching up to the run game, the quarterback element always gives you an advantage and a numbers advantage. And we know Shanahan, the first thing he wants to do is run the football. And so when you have that element and then you can do everything in the pass game off of it as well, like in theory, it makes most sense that the offense would be most prolific with Trey Lance's skill set. But realistically, how much of the offense can he execute at this point? We don't know. We just don't know.
You know, offensive football. I mean, to break it down to its simplest element, offensive football is about creating space. Defensive football is about closing that space down. Um, when you look at Trey, his gifts as far as movement and arm strength create a ton of space, and that's what I think he gives you. When you have that kind of arm strength and that kind of mobility, it creates room on the football field, and so I think in a lot of ways, Trey is exactly what they're looking for. But then you look at the Niners as well, and you say, well, you know, they don't. I think Trey's probably a better downfield passer, but then we saw Brock actually look better than Jimmy, taking shots down the field. So Brock, I think, is a better downfield passer than guys like me maybe gave him credit for. Where Brock is really good is that he gets the ball out on time, and his footwork is exemplary in the short game. So like all these plays where your footwork has to be absolutely perfect and you can't have any wasted steps in the short game close to the
Right.
line of scrimmage. His mechanics to get the ball out on the right, with the right mechanics, the right footwork, the right release on
The
time with
rhythm of his
touch,
feet.
with accuracy. I think he's worlds ahead of Trey in that regard. So it's a different offense. It's like I think Brock right now is a harder guy to defend if you're going to try, because he's going to be able to nickel and dime you to death and put it right on his receiver's hands. And I think Brock is going to be really, really dangerous in the red zone. But let's just say you need to pick up big chunks of yardage. Let's say you're down in the second half. Um, he's not going to, it's going to take him more plays, I believe, to move the team down the field than Lance potentially, who can get out of the pocket and then just gun one 50 yards down the field to Danny Gray streaking across the
I
field. Accuracy with the deep ball,
I'm
though.
not sure if I necessarily agree with that.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I think in theory Lance's arm strength in terms of stretching the field vertically somewhat makes a difference. But Brock's arm is plenty strong in terms of distance. It probably maxes out at 50-55 yards. But if you're capable of throwing it that far, that's plenty strong, right? Lance can probably throw it 65-70, but that 10 yards isn't making that much of a difference. I think that the bigger difference is that Lance can afford to be late. Brock can't, because the RPMs to me is what makes the difference in the arm strength. But Brock has shown that he can play on time, um, Now, he didn't do it as much as he probably should have, but he's shown he can play with great sense of timing and rhythm, and he's accurate. And I think throwing deep in particular, Larry, is less about arm strength and more about timing. If you let the ball go at the right time with the right velocity and or the right arc and it's that feel, then it's more about that than just your ability to let it go as far as you can let it go. And so from that standpoint, I don't know if Brock is necessarily at such a disadvantage. And he's also shown he's an aggressive decision maker despite his arm being what it is, right? You just mentioned that when you said that it was an improvement from Jimmy. He was a more aggressive decision maker from than Jimmy at times. Where I also
Much
think
more
I
so.
also
I mean,
disagree
much
even
more
more.
so.
Yeah,
I mean, Jimmy was
where I disagree
Jimmy. There
even
was
more with you,
zero
Larry.
downfield attack. Jimmy did not take shots down the field. He refused to almost. Brock is looking to take shots down the field. Much more than
Yeah, I
Jimmy
agree
was.
with you. And someone in the comments is talking about that Ayuk touchdown pass. Yeah, his arm got hit as he let it go, and he still got it 40 yards. His arm is plenty strong in terms of like you see Tua airing it out 50, 55 yards. Brock's arm is stronger than that one. But either way, not to get in an argument about that, Larry, the one thing I disagree is in the obvious drop back situations. Like, I guess maybe Trey can get you a chunk play off schedule, but I don't know if Trey has shown the same off-schedule instincts that Brock has shown at this point. Trey, when's the last time you remember Trey Lance really getting out of the pocket, making a guy miss and making a great throw off schedule? A lot of times he runs when he gets outside of the pocket. Now he's had a few plays in there that are like very, very impressive plays off schedule, don't get me wrong. But in the little we've seen him, we've also seen him willing to run. Brock Purdy makes a lot of plays off schedule. Now they're not the most physically gifted plays, but he does get outside of the pocket and he's able to make a lot of throws on the move. And then finally, I think the other thing is I think he's more proficient at this point. From what we've seen in the drop back pass game, he's more proficient. So if you are in a situation where you're down in the football game and you have to throw, Trey Lance wasn't very proficient at the drop back pass game in college. He was never even in that situation in college. I don't think he's ready for that situation. And so I understand what you mean by his physical ability perhaps giving you a better opportunity in that situation because he might create a chunk play. But I even disagree with that because I think that situation is more suited for Brock Purdy, who's experienced, who knows how to play in the drop back pass game a little bit better, who doesn't hesitate as much at this point. And it's not necessarily an indictment or an insult of Trey Lance because he hasn't played enough for us to, say he's this or he's that. But at least when it comes to the drop back pass element, Larry, that was something we had very few plays of even in college of him doing. And so that's just not something we can say he does. And they avoided a lot of those situations with him in the little he's played when they turn 3rd and 6 into a rundown or 3rd and 5 into a rundown. Like they're throwing on those downs with Garoppolo or Purdy.
All I see, I mean, and I haven't seen enough of Trey. Of course, I've seen more than all of you, but because I'm
Right.
at practice every day. But the only thing I'll say about Brock is that Brock hits the layups, right? So like, you get a guy in the flat, he hits him. He hits him 9 out of 10
Right.
times. Trey's airmailing that 2 or 3 times. That's the only difference that I see as far as their short stuff underneath. But Trey has an advantage, I think, in that he can make defenses fear throwing the ball over their head because of the arm strength, because of the ability to drive the ball with power down the field. So that's what I see. Like the play that Trey made to Danny Gray, which he got loose down the sideline, and he didn't just hit him. He hit him in stride. He never broke stride, and nobody touched him. He basically went on. He took him up top of the coverage, and hit him in stride. That's a pass that I haven't seen Jimmy make. That's a pass that even in practice I really have not seen Purdy make. But then the Purdy advantage is that little short, that little short cross, the little 5-yard out, the little precision passes, the short stuff. He's very proficient, and he can do it through a number of different arm angles, and he can do it off schedule if he has to. And Trey misses those passes in practice at least, or at least has. So that's the only thing I see differently. I'd be very eager to talk to Shanahan about how he sees his offense. Like, what's more
Right.
valuable to his offense? The quarterback with the unbelievable arm strength and the unbelievable foot speed. And I say foot speed, but I mean, I think has, I don't know what Trey runs, but I think he's pretty fast.
Me
People say,
too.
well, I don't think he's not Lamar. He's not that kind of a runner, but he is fast. And now we'll see post
Larry, can I
ankle.
add this
Yeah,
about
please
his
do.
running?
Yeah.
Um, for me, you know how a lot of people say he's not as fast as they thought. They'd run him maybe with the quarterback power, quarterback draw stuff because he can't necessarily get to the edge. One, the reason they do that is because that's what he did in college. This was not a zone read quarterback in college. His runs were quarterback draws, quarterback powers. That's how he ran in college.
Right.
But
And
honestly,
he ran over people.
right, he ran over people. But Larry, I don't think it's a speed issue. He just has a lack of indecision when he runs. He has indecision on the field in general. In the little we've seen him as a passer, there's a little bit of hesitancy. But I think there's just an indecisiveness when he runs. I don't know if he still needs to get comfortable with the speed. I don't know if he's still getting comfortable with the run plays. But I think his lack of speed and explosion is not the fact that he's fast, because when he scrambles and he's not thinking and he's just running instinctively, he looks plenty fast to me. He's not, Lamar Jackson fast, but he's faster than 90% of quarterbacks in the NFL. I think there's on these design run plays, there's just a hesitancy, there's an indecision where he's just not hitting the whole top gear full speed. And I think if he does, he might all of a sudden turn into an even more dangerous runner.